Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. APTN News has learned that Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for New Brunswick, Joanna Bernard, has resigned from the Child and Families portfolio. Bernard says difficulties working with the National Children's Chief Commission led to her resignation. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
In a letter obtained by APTN News, Bernard says her resignation is the result of the National Children's Chiefs Commission constantly trying to sideline the AFN as they prepare to negotiate a long-term agreement on First Nations child welfare reform with Ottawa. The letter says the NCCC has repeatedly disrespected the AFN and my role as portfolio holder and stalled our efforts to work together. It also says, we have seen this through the lack of respect to the development of our Memorandum of Understanding, AFN staff being asked to leave NCCC meetings when other organizations are permitted to stay, last-minute invites, and not providing materials, time, or space for the AFN Secretariat to support me from a technical level. Chief Pauline Frost of the Vuntut Gwich'in in Yukon chairs the now 19-member commission.
Working as First Nations across the country, it's not advisable for us to go out and divide ourselves, because that's what Canada wants. So our objective is really to start working towards reform. And the accusations and the comments is really not reflective of our views, and we've made it very clear right from the get-go.
First Nations Child and Family Caring Society Executive Director Cindy Blackstock told APTN News her organization has a good relationship with the NCCC. This includes working together to meet a Canadian Human Rights Tribunal order issued last month telling Ottawa, the AFN, the NCCC, and Caring Society to get back to the table to negotiate a long-term reform agreement.
So we've been working with technical experts across the country, including those at the National Children's Chiefs Commission, to come up with a consultation document, which should be ready in a matter of days. And then that'll be provided to leadership and experts in the region to provide feedback into that plan.
Frost reiterated that if the parties negotiating with Ottawa are divided, it will only further hurt First Nations children.
We need to work together because the solutions are there. And we've been at this far too long, and children are still being, imagine the child that was born 18 years ago, 18 years now, 18 years we've been at this, and the child's now aged out of the system and still hasn't been provided supports and services.
Bernard originally agreed to an interview with APTN News, but later declined. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Big news out of Quebec today as Premier Francois Legault announced that the highly contested Bill 97 has been dropped. The controversial bill aimed to modernize forestry law by dividing the forest into 3 zones: a development zone, a multi-use zone, and a conservation zone. This development comes after a wave of mobilization earlier this week when Indigenous groups, unions representing over 20,000 forestry workers, band councils, and environmental organizations united to demand complete withdrawal of Bill 97. Last week, a Quebec cabinet shuffle saw Maïti Blanchette Vizina, the Minister of Natural Resources and Forests, who tabled the bill last April, replaced by Jean-Francois Simard. He now has to start from scratch since the Legault government still intends to modernize the forestry regime. Protesters like Jean Choquette, who have been at the forefront of opposition to the bill, say this is good news, but remain skeptical.
Je ne sais pas à quel point moi je vois ça comme une excellente nouvelle, entre autres parce que on sait qu'il y a quelque chose d'autre qui s'en vient. Puis entre-temps, les forêts sont quand même détruites, sont quand même coupées. Les compagnies forestières continuent leur travail.
The government of Nova Scotia has introduced some amendments to their Provincial Crown Lands Act they hope will prevent blocking, obstructing, or impeding access roads on Crown land. The bill comes after a group of Mi'kmaq land protectors set up a camp on Hunter's Mountain in Unama'ki, Mi'kmaq for Cape Breton. Logging companies have since paused harvesting wood in the area. The land protectors say they are taking back stewardship of the mountain because logging companies are clear-cutting and destroying the ecosystem. The provincial government's proposed Protecting Nova Scotians Act will allow the removal of structures that obstruct access to Crown lands, harm provincial economic interests, and put public health and safety at risk. Punishment includes a $50,000 fine or 6 months in jail. Cheryl Maloney says Nova Scotia doesn't have jurisdiction on Hunter's Mountain.
The Mi'kmaq people and Indigenous peoples have the right to hunt, fish, live as usual, build hunt and fishing pottery camps. And that is the law of the land, and we have that law, and there's no law in this country that can remove that. So I think we need to take a bigger step. It's more than just whether the province has the jurisdiction, which it doesn't. And it doesn't have the justification, the public interest. The public is against.
Mohawk students with special educational needs from Tyendinaga First Nation in Southern Ontario were left on the sidelines by a federal program put in place to support those needs. Jordan's principal was put in place to provide access to a range of services, including health and educational services. With no funding in place for the 2025 school year, the Tyendinaga Mohawk Council stepped in. According to Chief Donald Miracle, there was no choice but to cover the 67 children and youth in September, or they wouldn't have had the supports to succeed. He's now drafting a letter to the Minister of Indigenous Services requesting the proper funding without delay. Miracle says this should have been dealt with in a timely manner.
I think it hasn't been handled, and I'm not happy with that. I think, you know, the federal government should have staffed up so that these applications could have been dealt with. And if there were budget shortfalls, there should have been briefing notes to the minister. Maybe there has been, I don't know. And the minister should have been advocating at the cabinet table so that the cabinet is aware of what the needs are that really deal with the First Nations who have a disadvantage, maybe a learning difficulty in the educational system.
To Manitoba now, where all week we've been covering incidents of vandalism and harassment affecting 2 female First Nation provincial cabinet ministers. Firefighters responded to 4 small fires at one minister's constituency office since early August. The other minister had the front windows of her office smashed in. Premier Wab Kinew has been silent on the issue until we reached him at an unrelated news conference early Thursday. He says the government doesn't speak publicly about safety issues for security reasons, but he denounces extremism on all sides.
There's no place for violence in our politics, and there's no place for threats of a physical nature or intimidation in our politics either. If we focus on the things that we have in common, it is going to lead to a safer society. It's going to lead to a society where everyone can reach their full potential. And we also have a responsibility as people in the public sphere not to amplify divisions in the society. This is not going to be breaking news, but you can't firebomb anywhere in our society. It doesn't matter if it's an MLA's office or if it's a park building or if it's a business or if it's a community center. No firebombing, please.
At that same event, Premier Kinew also addressed problems within child and family services in the province, saying there needs to be improvement. Last week, Winnipeg police arrested 2 foster parents, a 25-year-old female and 26-year-old male, in relation to a child abuse investigation. According to police, a child under their care was transported to hospital in critical condition and sustained life-altering injuries. 3 other children were removed from the home and taken to hospital for medical assessment, one of which showed signs of being assaulted. Police say the critically injured child did not receive immediate medical attention prior to police intervention. Kinew says he's not satisfied with oversight in the CFS system.
Well, I'm not satisfied because we have kids going into foster care. You know, we want a society where everybody who brings a child into the world is well enough to raise them on their own. And I will never be satisfied until that's the reality, so there's always going to be more work to do. We'll definitely have to do a lot differently in the future. I mean, You don't beat up kids. Everyone knows this. How is it that this even happened in the first place? It's an important question to answer.
Time to step aside for a quick break, and then our Truth and Politics panel will weigh in on the FSIN audit. Stick around. Welcome back. Questionable, ineligible, or unsupported. Those are the words used by the federal government and accounting firm KPMG in their forensic audit into the finances of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in Saskatchewan. The FSIN represents 74 First Nations. Chief Bobby Cameron has led the organization since 2015. The audit looked at how $47.1 million was spent between April 2019 and April 2024. Among the findings, $30.3 million of the $47 million is questionable. $7.9 out of $11 million in administration fees was ineligible or questionable. $246,000 out of $530,000 paid to a former employee is ineligible. The full audit can be seen on our website, aptnnews.ca. Saskatoon Tribal Council Tribal Chief Mark Arkand and other leaders will be holding a press conference tomorrow morning to discuss the findings. We'll bring you more here on the show tomorrow. The FSNI audit was among many of our topics for this week's Truth and Politics panel. With us, as always, is Jennifer Leywitz, CEO of Pasqua Strategies, and Nigan Sinclair, columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, the federal audit into the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations is finally public. The numbers are what had been reported. Anything stick out to you from the audit?
I think what stuck out for me the most was how evident it is that, ISC is essentially in these things for themselves, and I mean that respectfully. But at the same time, we're starting to see what forensic audits actually look like from a federal government. And I think a lot of people are not understanding that, forensic audits from the federal government is them essentially auditing how that funding was received by that organization and some of the recommendations that come from it. So they audit things like program spending and that sort of thing. They're not going to go, down into the weeds and start releasing names or anything like that. So it comes back to us as a people on what type of accountability parameters are we actually putting onto our leadership. I don't care how soft or how hard anyone thinks that this audit was when it was communicated. What actually concerns me is the fact that the FSIN leadership has not been communicating with anybody. Where are you? What is going on? What is happening here? Do you not have a crisis communications team that could at least give you a hint that you should be talking not only with your chiefs that you represent, over 70 of them, but with everyone else that is still not hearing from the FSIN? I cannot believe that they read this report on September 11th. Today is the 24th or 25th of September. We still have not heard from them. And this is supposed to be the political body that represents First Nations in Saskatchewan. And right now we're seeing a political body that does not have the backbone to communicate on what the heck is going on internally there and why we're hearing about, tens of millions of dollars being questioned.
We are expecting to hear from some First Nations leadership tomorrow on Friday, not the FSIN that I am aware of, but Nigan, over $34 million in questionable, ineligible, or unsupported spending. We'll hear more, I guess, tomorrow, but what do you think happens next here?
Yeah, we went through some of the nuts and bolts last week on the podcast here. You start losing a sense of the intricacies of what Jen's talking about when they talk to me these big figures of money and kind of the unaccountability. Now, there's two ways to look at it. The first is that First Nations organizations are chronically under-resourced, underfunded, under-supported. Human resources are often at a minimum. Nobody on a First Nation grows up to dream to be an accountant. And so when we do get accountants, A, they're very rare, and B, they're not often our people. We often have to work with people outside of our communities who are interested far more in profit than community development. And so we're struggling all the time trying to, just administrate and deal with this massive bureaucracy of the federal government. On another level, it's exactly what Jen spoke about. As a member of the media, I'm constantly frustrated with the fact that, frankly, Indigenous organizations, especially groups that are formed from chief lobby efforts, which are not really governments often, they act as they want to be treated like governments when they want to be treated like governments, but then when they want to be held accountable like governments and they suddenly are not governments anymore, they certainly don't act that way. They ban media from meetings. They have closed door. They target people particularly, and one of, Jen certainly knows that personally. This is not the way governments are supposed to act. We're supposed to be for the people, by the people, all those kinds of things. And oftentimes, I think First Nations organizations are able to put up a shield to say, I'm government on a Thursday, but I'm not government on a Friday. And I think that is a real sad, tragic part of this whole story, which is that our leadership doesn't often feel that they can have to be accountable to people like media or, frankly, even some of their own citizens. And that's very frustrating because many of us are out there saying always, recognize First Nation sovereignty, recognize that we have the ability to speak for ourselves, and then work very hard within communities to do that. And then certain individuals in certain positions of power that act differently.
Always a great conversation. Great to see you both. Thanks.
Thanks.
And it was a stacked panel this week as we also discussed the Joanna Bernard resignation of her portfolio, the vandalism at the constituency offices of 2 Manitoba cabinet ministers, and the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. You can listen to it all over on the podcast or watch it all over on our APTN News YouTube page. Time for one last break now, and then a story on the Tsleil-Waututh Nation unveiling a special project for the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And today's picture comes from Rick Smith, who shared this beautiful shot from Haines Junction in the Yukon with mountains in the distance. Almost looks like a painting. Thanks for sharing, Rick. We want to see your pictures. You can send them to share@aptn.ca to be featured on the national news. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 25 under sunny skies in Fredericton, 22 with the sun out for Halifax, 11 with showers in Kuujjuaq, rain in Nain, and a high of 10. 23 with the sun out in Montreal, cloudy, and 10 for Chibougamau. 19 in Sault Ste. Marie, sun's out, and 22 for Ottawa. 19 under sunny skies in Thunder Bay, 18 and sunny in Sioux Lookout. 16 in God's Lake and Norway House, 15 for Thompson. Sunny and 24 for Winnipeg, 22 under sunny skies in Dauphin. 20 in Regina and Estevan, sun's out, and 21 in Saskatoon. 17 in Meadow Lake, 14 for La Ronge. In northern Alberta, sunny and 17 in High Level, cloudy and 14 for Grand Prairie. 19 in Edmonton, sunny and 23 in Lethbridge. Cloudy and 15 in Vancouver, sunny and 16 for Kamloops. 11 with showers in Prince George, cloudy and 8 for Smithers. -1 with snow in Old Crow, showers and 7 for Whitehorse. 12 in Yellowknife, 11 in Norman Wells. 0 in Sax Harbor, +2 for Pawlatuck. 5 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove, cloudy and 6 for Baker Lake. 0 in Resolute, -4 with snow in Arctic Bay. To Yellowknife now, where today there was a march for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. People came to Sambake Park in Yellowknife to march through downtown to the Legislative Assembly building. The march was organized by Naka Power Utilities, an Indigenous-owned power company in the NWT. They partnered with Dene Nation and other Indigenous groups to organize the march. Naka Power has been around for 70 years, with many of its employees being residential school survivors. Daryl Bolio, chair of the board of directors for Naka Power, explains why the company wanted to give its employees this opportunity for remembrance.
We're an Indigenous Northern Indigenous company. We have Northern Indigenous employees. As I mentioned earlier, we've had 3 generations of families work for Naka Power Utilities, and we service Indigenous communities.
There are many events happening in honor of Orange Shirt Day on September 30th across the country. APTN's Tina House has a story about a community in North Vancouver who's unveiling a unique tribute to honor the day.
It's a day of celebration as the Tsleil-Waututh Nation in North Vancouver unveil their Orange Sidewalk, honoring the Every Child Matters campaign, started by the Orange Shirt Society. Phyllis Webstad is the founder of the organization, and it's her orange shirt story that started the movement. For Chief Justin George, it's a time of reflection on what this project symbolizes.
You know, it's mixed emotions. You know, but it's a beautiful day because it's really about recognition and really honoring, you know, the dark history. But more importantly, it's how our elders and ancestors were just so resilient. And I mentioned earlier, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally, so hurt. And it's a dark history for our people.
Candy Thomas is the artist who designed the sidewalk, and she says she is honored to do this important work and create this design.
Thunderbird, he's embracing the babies that never made it home from residential school.
And for Chief George, whose own father, the late Chief Leonard George, was taken to a residential school at just 5 years old. He says we have come a long way, but so much more healing needs to take place.
But the beauty of today is around healing and moving forward, and really that's the strength of our elders and ancestors. You know, they couldn't break their spirit, and it's that light that they brought forward to the next generations. And you know, everybody's different in their healing journey, you know, and so there's still suffering and need of that support, and we have to be aware of that. But as a collective and as a whole, I think we've come a long ways.
The Orange Shirt Society has launched 15 orange sidewalks across Canada so far. Tina House, APTN National News, North Vancouver.
Thanks, Tina. And that is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday as we all head over to the Korn concert. Just kidding, none of us got tickets. For more on all of the day's news, though, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. And Creason will be here at 1 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow with your first look at the day's news. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. Stick around for an encore presentation of Face to Face. That's up next. Have a great day.
You want to wrestle? Hey. Hey, 25. Hey, buddy.